They burned down the only place that gave him peace. What they didn't know, he used to track warlords for a living. Now he's hunting HOA board members, one signature at a time. He bought the land under their feet, exposed their secrets, and turned their kingdom into a sanctuary for soldiers. They erased his cabin. He built a legacy. This isn't just revenge, it's federal-grade redemption. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. I didn't expect to survive the war, let alone the years that followed it. Civilians think combat ends when you come home. Truth is, sometimes that's when the real fight begins. I spent a decade drifting after my discharge. One city to the next, one job after another, but nothing stuck. I couldn't sleep through the night without waking in a cold sweat. Crowds made me nervous. Fireworks, forget it. Then I got the letter. My grandfather, a quiet man with calloused hands and eyes that always saw straight through the noise, had passed away. I hadn't seen him in years. He lived off-grid, up in the mountains of northern Arizona. No cell service, no internet, just trees, wind, and the kind of quiet most people spend their whole lives running from. He left me one thing, the cabin. It wasn't much to look at. A-frame structure, faded red tin roof, stone chimney that always smoked too much in the winter. But the first time I stood on that front porch and heard nothing but pine needles rustling, no engines, no sirens, no yelling, I felt something click back into place, like the gears in my mind, rusted from years of noise, were finally turning again. I spent that first night lying on a mattress on the floor, watching the stars through the cracked skylight. I didn't dream. That was a win. I started making repairs, slowly, carefully, replacing rotten beams, sanding old oak counters, rewiring light fixtures that buzzed like they were cursed. It became a kind of therapy. My hands moved, and my mind followed. I learned the rhythm of the forest, the smell of morning dew, the way the mist rolled in low around 6 a.m., like a ghost that never meant harm. For the first time in years, I found silence. Not the threatening kind, but the healing kind. A few weeks in, I got the first letter. It came in a pale manila envelope with a printed return address, Oak Summit Estates, HOA. I didn't even know the area had an HOA. My grandfather never mentioned it. He built this cabin himself in the 70s, before most of the paved roads, before there were property lines marked out like battle zones. The letter wasn't exactly friendly. Your structure fails to meet current community architectural standards, as defined under Section 4. Please submit renovation plans for review. Structure? Renovation plans? I laughed out loud and tossed the letter on a pile of firewood. Maybe someone in a polo shirt got bored in their lakeside bungalow and decided to play sheriff. I figured it was a mistake. Bureaucratic static. I was wrong. Another letter came the next week. This one was marked Second Notice. Failure to comply will result in fines assessed at 100. I called the number on the letter. A chipper voice answered, Oak Summit Administrative Office, this is Denise. I explained calmly, maybe too calmly, that I wasn't part of the HOA, had never signed into it, and wasn't bound by their rules. She replied with something that stuck with me. If your property falls within the Oak Summit Overlay Zone, you are automatically enrolled in the HOA, regardless of your consent. You inherited membership along with the deed. Automatically enrolled. Just like that. I didn't sign a thing, but apparently I was now part of a game I didn't ask to play. I tried to shrug it off. The cabin was too important, too sacred. I kept fixing it, painting, restoring, healing. But the letters didn't stop. They escalated. Now it was land use non-compliance, unauthorized septic access, even wildfire risk management violations. Each envelope came thicker than the last, stacked with codes, citations, photos. Someone had been hiking the woods, photographing my place from a distance. That's when I knew this wasn't about paperwork. This was targeting. Still, I stayed. Because I needed the cabin more than I feared the HOA. I had been through worse. I had seen war. I had buried friends. What was a couple of retirees with clipboards going to do to me? I remember sitting on the porch one evening, boots up on the rail, listening to the cicadas hum as the sun dipped low. A neighbor from down the hill passed by on his ATV and called out, "Careful, The HOA don't like outsiders fixing things up. They think it encourages, the wrong kind of folk. I didn't know what he meant exactly, but I didn't like the sound of it. Still, I wasn't leaving. Not again. Not when I'd finally found peace. Absolutely. Here's your next section, following the standard heading prompt with 900 words, continuing the suspenseful and emotional arc. At first, I treated the HOA letters like background noise. A nuisance, sure, but nothing I hadn't dealt with before. I'd seen bureaucrats try to drown people in red tape. This felt similar, until it didn't. About a month after that first phone call with Denise, I received an envelope that was different. Thicker, heavier, certified mail. I signed for it with muddy hands and opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a formal notice of daily fines, now totaling over $3,000 for non-compliance with several code sections. Apparently, the color of my cabin's new stain violated visual harmony protocols. My compost bin wasn't approved, and the smoke emissions from my chimney had surpassed community air quality thresholds. It was laughable if it wasn't so deliberate. They were watching me, documenting me, and they were just getting started. I tried calling again, more insistent this time. I asked to speak to someone on the board. That's when I first heard her name. All board decisions are final, Denise said cheerfully. You're welcome to submit a formal appeal to Janice. She oversees code enforcement. Janice. The name alone sounded like trouble, the kind that hides behind policies and uses paperwork like a weapon. I wrote the appeal anyway, typed it up, printed it, and sent it certified mail. I laid out everything, the repairs I was doing, the history of the cabin, the lack of notice in my deed about any HOA restrictions. I even included photos before and after shots, showing the work I'd done to restore the place. 2 weeks later, I got a one-page response. Your appeal has been reviewed and denied. Continued non-compliance will result in legal action. Janice Holloway, board chairwoman. No reason given. No acknowledgement of my evidence. Just a signature in looping cursive and the implicit message, you don't belong here. The tone had changed. This wasn't about firewood piles or paint color anymore. I noticed a car idling at the edge of my property one afternoon. A silver Lexus, tinted windows. It sat there for 10 minutes before backing out. The next day, a drone buzzed overhead while I was splitting logs. It hovered for a few seconds, then zipped back toward the hill. I filed a police report, but the deputy just shrugged. Well, technically, HOAs can do aerial inspections if it's over their jurisdiction. Whole thing's legal, believe it or not. Legal. Maybe. But ethical? Decent? No way. That's when I started documenting everything. Every letter, every voicemail, every unannounced visit. I bought a dash cam and set it to record 24/7, even when parked. Installed motion lights and trail cams hidden in the trees. I even made a spreadsheet of the fines and violations, over 30 in total by now, cross-referenced with photos and timestamps. The deeper I dug, the stranger it got. A neighbor named Phil, older guy, Vietnam vet, used to fish in the creek behind my lot. Stopped by one morning. He saw me out front, fiddling with a camera mount. They get to you too? He asked. I nodded. He shook his head slowly. They got my cousin's place last year. Same game. Kept fining him till he had to sell. Guess who bought it? He didn't have to say it. I already knew. Janice. He spat into the dirt. Her husband owns a development firm. They're trying to turn this whole ridge into some luxury lakefront thing. That was the moment it all clicked. This wasn't about me breaking the rules. This was about getting me out. They wanted the land. My cabin was just an obstacle. And now that I wasn't playing nice, they were turning up the heat. I tried one last time to talk to someone, face to face. I showed up at the HOA office in town, tucked between a nail salon and a frozen yogurt shop. Glass doors, fake plants, and motivational posters that felt like lies. Janice was there. Tall, late 50s, blonde bob so stiff it could probably stop a bullet. She looked me up and down like I'd tracked mud onto her marble floor. I introduced myself, held out a hand. She didn't take it. We don't accept walk-ins, she said, gesturing to a fake fern. You'll need to schedule through the administrator. I told her I just wanted to talk. Human to human. To explain. To find a solution that didn't involve threats and fines. She didn't blink. Your structure is incompatible with the community vision, she said. That word again. Structure. Like my home was a defective toy, not a living memory. I left with clenched fists and a calm I didn't feel. Later that night, I wrote in my notebook. I thought they were just bullies with clipboards. Turns out, they were setting something up. I didn't know what their plan was exactly. Not yet. But I could feel it in my gut. Something bigger was coming. Something worse. And if they were going to push, I'd be ready to push back. I wasn't supposed to be gone long. Just a routine check-in at the VA clinic 2 towns over. Blood pressure, meds review, and a new therapist who asked all the right questions but didn't really want the answers. The appointment ran late, and I stayed overnight with a buddy from my unit. He had a spare couch, a six-pack, and a TV that only played war documentaries we both pretended not to watch. I woke the next morning to 4 missed calls and a voicemail from the sheriff's department. There'd been a fire. I don't remember the drive back, just flashes. Headlights, rain, knuckles white on the steering wheel. I turned off the main road and saw the smoke before I even crested the ridge. It wasn't like in the movies. No bright orange inferno, no firefighters in slow motion. Just wet ash, the skeletal remains of timber, and steam rising from what used to be my home. The cabin, my grandfather's cabin, was gone. Gone. A blackened scar on the hillside was all that was left. The stone chimney still stood defiantly crooked, surrounded by collapsed beams and melted metal. The roof had caved in. The front porch was unrecognizable. Even the old pine tree out front had split in half, its charred trunk still smoldering. I stepped through the caution tape like a ghost. A deputy called out to me, but I kept walking. Boots sinking into the soot. I found the cast iron pan my grandfather used to cook eggs in every morning. It was warped now, burnt beyond use. I picked it up anyway. They told me it started inside the structure. That's what the preliminary report said. No lightning, no fallen wires. Point of origin appears to be near the fireplace. Possibly faulty flue or spark. Except I'd had the flue inspected 2 weeks prior, and I hadn't lit the fireplace in days. It didn't make sense. Unless it wasn't meant to. The insurance company was the next punch to the gut. I'd filed the claim that same night, heart still racing, soot still under my nails. 2 days later, I got a call. Unfortunately, your policy does not cover wildfire-related structural loss due to your cabin being in a high-risk zone. High risk? I asked when that designation was made. The agent paused. About 6 months ago, the local HOA submitted documentation to reclassify portions of the area due to increased brush density and emergency vehicle access limitations. Oak Summit Estates. They'd done it. They'd had the area redlined for fire risk right before turning up the heat on me. And conveniently, they hadn't informed the residents, at least not me. I stood in the ashes of my life, holding a denial letter, wondering just how far they were willing to go. That's when the grief turned to something else. A low burn in my chest that felt familiar. Determination. I went back to what I'd started before. Only now, I wasn't just documenting. I was investigating. I pulled up county fire reports from the last 5 years. Turns out my fire wasn't the first in Oak Summit. There had been 2 others, one structure fire 2 years ago, one brush fire that mysteriously jumped a containment line. Both were ruled accidental. Both properties sold within 4 months. To the same LLC. One owned by Holloway Land and Development. Janice's husband's company. My hands shook as I read the paperwork. The LLC name was Bland. Blue Ridge Holdings. But a few deep dives into public records showed the paper trail. Shell corporations hiding behind other shell corporations. But eventually, it all looped back. They'd been clearing people out. Quietly, efficiently. And I'd walked right into the trap. I checked with the fire marshal. Asked to see the final report. He was polite but guarded. Said it would take weeks to finalize. I asked if arson was being considered. He wouldn't answer, but his eyes flicked sideways when I mentioned the HOA. I went to the county records office and started pulling land deeds. Every lot that had changed hands in the last 3 years. A pattern emerged: older cabins, long-standing families, suddenly gone, their lots consolidated under commercial purchase agreements. And the name that came up the most: Janice Holloway. Well, not her name directly, but her husband's. And his business partners. They were assembling something. A resort maybe. A private retreat? Who knows? All I knew was that my cabin was never meant to survive. I sat in my truck that night, parked at the edge of what used to be my driveway, staring at the embered ruins. The mountain air was cold, but my chest burned. They didn't just take lumber and stone. They didn't just destroy property. They didn't just burn wood and nails. They burned my last connection to peace. And I wasn't going to let that go. They thought I was alone, that I'd cut my losses, sell the land for pennies and disappear. But they miscalculated, because I'd spent years navigating threats in foreign countries. And I'd just uncovered a war on my own soil. Only this time, I wasn't the soldier. I was the storm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. For me, for Ellen, for Phil, for everyone who'd been pushed off their land under the guise of HOA, order, and safety. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to own them. By the end of the month, I had a war board on the wall of the cheap rental I was staying in. Maps, photos, LLC flowcharts, meeting minutes, financial transfers, even Janice's campaign donation history. And quietly, I started reaching out to journalists, to county officials, to landowners who hadn't sold yet. The story was spreading. Whispers turned to questions. Janice's once pristine image started to fray. But I didn't want exposure yet. Not yet. I wanted control. So I changed my strategy. Instead of confronting them head-on, I decided to go under their radar. Because Janice and her crew had made one fatal assumption. They thought the man in the cabin was just a hermit. They never considered that I might also be a tactician. And that I was just getting started. There's a certain kind of power in patience. Not the passive kind. The precise kind. The kind that waits, watches, and doesn't blink until the moment is right. That's where I was now. I'd spent weeks digging through Janice's paper trail. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Hollow corporations, real estate shell games, shady land swaps. But then I stumbled on something unexpected. A document that wasn't supposed to be public. The original land use charter for Oak Summit Estates. Buried in a county clerk archive, digitized poorly, it looked like any other boilerplate agreement. Until I hit page 14. That's where I saw it. Common areas, including HOA administrative properties and recreational zones, shall be leased from Ridge Rock Holdings, LLC, under a 30-year non-renewable commercial lease. That name didn't ring a bell. At first. But a deeper dive revealed it was yet another shell company. And who was behind Ridge Rock? You guessed it, Carl Holloway, Janice's husband. Turns out the HOA didn't actually own the land their headquarters, community center, and lakeside pavilion sat on. They were renters. And that lease? It was about to be up for review. But not for renewal. Because Ridge Rock had quietly put the lease up for sale, likely assuming it would be snapped up by one of their friendly subsidiaries to keep everything in the family. But Carl had gotten sloppy. He'd listed it through a rural commercial property broker, under a different LLC, assuming no one would look twice. I did. And I wasn't alone. Through Mark, the lawyer I trusted like a brother, I got in touch with a veteran-run investment group called Liberty Corp. Guys who'd seen real war and now specialized in land acquisition, tactical real estate recovery, and turning blighted properties into nonprofits. We spoke the same language. They moved quietly. Within 3 weeks, Liberty Corp, using a generic-sounding LLC with no ties to me, secured the lease from Ridge Rock Holdings, the HOA headquarters. Janice's pristine glass front building, with its faux gold plaques and mahogany nameplates, now sat on my land. And no one knew. Not Janice. Not the board. Not Denise with the perfect phone voice. No one. The irony made me smile. Not out of malice, but out of satisfaction. For months they'd buried me in fines, threats, and legal smog. They thought they'd pushed me out. Instead, they pushed me into position. Now I didn't just have dirt on them. I had the dirt. The land beneath their feet. The moment the deal closed, I took a drive. Parked my truck near the HOA office like I had 100 times before. Walked in slow, wearing a flannel and ball cap. Not out of disguise, just comfort. The same receptionist greeted me. Same false brightness. Mr. Carter, we really must insist all future inquiries go through. Just here to drop something off? I said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a certified copy of the land transfer, with a single-page cover note. Please inform the board that Ridgerock Holdings has transferred lease rights to a new entity. Details to follow in 30 days. This affects all structures currently standing on parcel 807. She didn't understand the numbers, but Janice would. I walked out smiling. Back at the rental, I sat at my makeshift desk, stared at my wall of maps and diagrams, took a breath for the first time in weeks. Because here's the thing. They thought power came from positions, being chairwoman, signing forms, enforcing codes. But real power comes when they're sitting in a meeting room, voting on how to punish the next non-compliant resident, completely unaware. I sat in their meetings smiling. They didn't know I owned the floor beneath them. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But the game had changed. And now, I was playing from underneath, where the roots grow, where the foundations crack, where the truth waits for its moment to rise. The first rule of taking down a corrupt system: don't come through the front door. They were watching for me, still painting me as the bitter outsider, the disgruntled veteran with a burned-down cabin and a chip on his shoulder. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd disappeared into the woods like a wounded animal. They had no idea I was already inside the walls. A close friend of mine, Tucker, another vet I served with, had quietly bought a small fixer-upper at the edge of Oak Summit. A foreclosure property, cheap, ignored, and technically within HOA voting jurisdiction. We fixed it up just enough to meet compliance, planted a few shrubs, and filed all the paperwork. Tucker now had full voting rights. We put his name on the ballot for the open board seat. A quiet candidate, no photo, no campaign signs. Just a simple blurb: homeowner, veteran, focused on transparency and fairness. Janice didn't even blink. She was too busy worrying about the land deal she didn't realize she'd already lost. While the ballots were being distributed, I made my next move. A week before the vote, I leaked a curated batch of financial discrepancies to a local community blog. Quiet site, trusted by locals. Nothing dramatic, just enough to raise eyebrows. Invoices to shell vendors with no listed addresses. Landscaping contracts inflated by 40%. Consulting fees paid to Janice's brother-in-law. It was all public record, all pulled from the HOA's own filings. But no one had ever connected the dots, or dared to. The blog post went viral within the community. Residents started asking questions. Quiet murmurs at the coffee shop, a few calls to the county auditor. Janice held a special meeting to deny everything. But the damage was done. Election day arrived. The vote was held in the rec hall, the same one I now owned the land beneath. I didn't go in, Tucker did. He stood tall, clean-shaven, wearing a suit he hadn't touched since his sister's wedding. Spoke just once, a short statement about ethics, accountability, and protecting homeowners. He didn't need to say more. By 7 p.m., the results were posted. Tucker won, by one ballot. Just one. And that's all we needed. The next morning, Tucker walked into the board office and requested immediate access to HOA financials and meeting logs under board privilege. They hesitated. He handed them a letter from our attorney, citing HOA statute and fiduciary duty. They complied. By noon, we had access to everything. Emails, internal memos, expense records, and within an hour of sorting through them, it was clear. Janice had been funneling money through overlapping entities, rigging bids, and manipulating code enforcement to target high-value lots. We didn't just have smoke. We had a firestorm. They burned my cabin, so I lit a fire they couldn't put out. A paper trail. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about exposure and control. They never imagined I'd infiltrate their little kingdom, let alone bring their empire down from the inside. But they'd built their whole world on paper, and I was holding the match. They thought the worst had passed, that I'd vanished into the smoke of my cabin, another casualty of their paperwork war. But the real reckoning hadn't even begun. The monthly HOA board meeting was held in the same place as always. The Oak Summit Community Hall, hardwood floors, mounted landscape prints, and a big laminated rules chart on the wall that no one ever read until it was used against them. Janice was already at the front table when I walked in. Unannounced, uninvited. She froze for just a second. Recovered fast, tried to smile. "This is a private session, Mr. Carter." I didn't respond. I just handed her a folder. Then I handed the same folder to each board member. Inside, certified documentation of the land lease transfer for the community property. Proof of ownership through Liberty Corps' holding entity. Board member Tucker's motion for an emergency vote of no confidence, citing breach of fiduciary duty. And a printed email, signed by Janice, detailing targeted fines for non-compliant Lot 41I, my property, weeks before the fire. The room went silent. One of the board members, Linda, the treasurer, started reading aloud. Her hands trembled. Janice stood up, voice tight. "This is absurd. These documents could be fake. We need legal counsel." Tucker cut her off, calm and measured. According to Article 7.3 of the Charter, a board member found to have violated ethical standards may be removed by majority vote in an emergency session. 3 minutes later, the vote was called. Janice, removed. 2 of her allies, removed. Only Linda abstained, staring at the documents like they were a mirror she'd never wanted to look into. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just passed out the last sheet of paper. A notice of intent to file federal charges. HOA financial fraud, civil racketeering, coordinated property harassment, and a separate claim for civil conspiracy to commit arson. The room emptied like someone pulled the drain. Within days, the HOA began to implode. Residents started pulling their dues. Local media picked up the fraud story. That anonymous whistleblower leak had legs now, and names attached. Depositions were requested, bank records subpoenaed, and quietly, the county assessor's office opened a parallel investigation. Janice's development deals froze overnight. Her husband's LLCs stopped responding to emails, and that lakeside clubhouse she once ruled from. That was my land now, and I had plans for it. I stood at the edge of the ridge later that week, watching the sun spill over the pine tops where my cabin used to sit. The wind was sharp, but clean. The kind of air that says something new is coming. I thought about all the damage they'd done, not just to me but to the whole community. The lies, the bullying, the slow erosion of trust until good people just gave up. No more. I wasn't just cleaning house. I was rewriting the rules. I didn't scream. I just handed them their final notice with my name on the letterhead. They burned down a cabin. I built a sanctuary. The land sat quiet for a while after the fallout, after Janice was voted out, after subpoenas started arriving at mailboxes that used to smile on cue. For a time, the ridge seemed to hold its breath, like the forest itself was watching, waiting to see what would rise from the ashes. I knew exactly what it would be. Not another battle. Not another bitter lawsuit. Not even just a rebuilt home. Something better. The first logs were laid in spring. Same foundation as before. Same footprint my grandfather built with his own hands. But this time, we expanded. Not just one cabin, but a network of small shelters spaced gently through the trees. Each one built by volunteers, many of them veterans. Some carried scars you could see. Most carried the kind you couldn't. We didn't talk about the past much. We talked about soil, roofing angles, how the wind shifted through the valley in the evenings and made it cooler by 10 degrees. We called it Camp Valor Ridge. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for the forgotten men, the ones who came home with no map, no mission, and no place to put down their grief. No one was turned away. If you served, you had a bed, no cost, no clock, just woods, silence, and time. The local press caught wind of it by midsummer. A reporter named Ashley came up for a weekend, expecting a feel-good story about charity. What she found was something rawer, realer. Her article ran with the headline, "From Scorched Earth to Sanctuary. One veteran's fight against the HOA that tried to erase him." It spread fast. Donations came in. Tools, cots, even a small solar panel company offered to outfit the cabins for free. Churches brought food. A retired therapist offered weekend sessions under the trees. Suddenly, this wasn't just my war anymore. It was a movement. And while the cabins rose, the investigations deepened. Carl Holloway, Janice's husband, was now the subject of a full racketeering probe. Turns out flipping HOA land through fraudulent enforcement and insider bids doesn't sit well with state attorneys. They called it coordinated displacement for financial gain. Janice disappeared from public view. Rumor had it she moved out of state, pending depositions. No one missed her. The HOA board was dissolved and restructured. Residents voted to dissolve the charter and rebuild from the ground up. This time with transparency and without fear. My name was on the new draft. So was Tucker's. And the cabin. It's back. Same front porch, same stone chimney. A little straighter this time. Inside, there's a photo of my grandfather on the mantel. Right next to it, the scorched cast iron pan I pulled from the rubble, cleaned, sanded down, and mounted like a badge of honor. It's not a house anymore. It's a beacon. Sometimes I sit on the porch and watch the sun melt down through the trees, same as I used to. And sometimes I hear laughter, real laughter from the campers down the trail. Guys I've never met. Some who don't even know my story. That's the point. It was never really about me. They erased my piece. I rebuilt it for others who never had any. They tried to take everything. Instead, they gave me a mission. And I built something that will outlive every one of their threats. The sun broke slow over the ridge that morning, golden light spilling through the trees like it knew something sacred was about to happen. I stood at the edge of the rebuilt cabin, boots firm in the earth, a flag in my hands. Not folded, not draped, not carried in silence. Raised. We'd installed the pole just outside the circle of cabins. Tall, solid steel, sunk deep into bedrock. It didn't lean, didn't sway, and when the wind caught the cloth, it snapped loud across the valley. The stars and stripes. Not for ceremony, for claiming. Behind me, the camp was waking up. I could hear Tucker calling out breakfast, someone tuning a guitar by the fire pit, and the laughter of two kids skipping rocks down by the creek. Kids of one of the vets who came up for the weekend with his family. They'd never seen mountains before. The cabin's front door was open. Inside, the stone chimney held firm. The old cast iron pan rested on the hearth like it had never left. This wasn't just a home now. It was proof. I saw the car before I heard it, that same silver Lexus creeping down the old gravel path like it had once owned the road. Janice? Window up, sunglasses on. She didn't stop, just slowed down enough to see what had risen from the ashes. Her face didn't change, but her hands tightened on the wheel. She was a visitor now, a ghost in a place that no longer whispered her name. The old HOA sign that once sat at the edge of the property with its cursive rules and gold leaf trim. Gone. In its place stood a carved wooden plaque. Valor Ridge, a sanctuary for those who served, founded by C. Carter. They said I didn't belong. Now their names are off the gate, and mine's carved in stone. Ever faced power that thought it couldn't be challenged? This was just one cabin, but there are thousands more. Real stories, real justice, and the battles they never saw coming. Stick around because the next one, it might be yours.